Hello, everyone. This is a presentation that I'm going to give on my work on the Sustainable Development Goals and system dynamics. And we have some people in the audience, so maybe you can introduce yourselves. So maybe Martha, you can start.
Yeah, thanks, Ivan. So I've known Ivan for a couple of years since I became very involved in doing volunteer work with the International System Dynamics Society. I am a retired veterinarian and I live on treaty land in southern Alberta in the city of Calgary. And Eric.
You can.
Hi, I'm Eric Roseman. I am just a system dynamics novice, and I am in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Ray, go ahead.
Ray Barton, with president of NCOSI Canada. I live in Ottawa, Canada, and I'm looking forward to this. It's not often that we take some of these international metrics and model them against Canadian measurements. So I'm looking forward to it.
Suraj, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. So I am a mentee of Ivan, and we are working on a number of projects which are related to system dynamics. And this presentation that he will be presenting will be very useful as we move to SDGs and to circular economy in the future.
Yeah, Suraj is one of the co-authors in the paper, and so maybe she can answer some questions if she wants to. My name's Ivan Taylor. I'm from Policy Dynamics in Ontario, Canada, and we're a small consulting company. And I've been the company's been going since 2001, and I'm also a member of the System Dynamics Society since 1997, and I've been a one-on-one mentor for the Society since 2020. And I joined NCOSI Canada. This is the International Council on Systems Engineering in 2021, I think, 2020 or 2021. And I'm the secretary of the Canadian chapter of NCOSI, and I'm also the secretary of the Canadian chapter of System Dynamics and the secretary of the Irish chapter of System Dynamics. So without further ado, I will start my presentation. Okay, so this presentation is entitled A System Dynamics Approach to Reaching the Sustainable Development Goals. It was work that four of us are doing currently, and we're applying this model to a number of countries. So the other authors are Tak Ono from University of Bergen, and Suraj Kul, who is from Carleton University, and Bunmi Filipidi, who's from Nigeria. And we're applying this to a number of countries, hopefully in a paper soon to be published, and it can be applied to any country. So this presentation is actually an application to Canada. So so this is the authors again, as I mentioned. And as background, the United Nations has defined 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and they have an agenda for 2030, which was adopted in 2015 by all UN members. However, one of the issues that we found when we looked at the Sustainable Development Goals is that they're lagging indicators, and it's not clear how you forecast into the future for planning purposes. So we wanted to rectify that. So here's the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. You're probably familiar with them. They cover a large range of development and well-being aspects of a country. And countries actually, the leaders of countries are very interested in their scores in the Sustainable Development Goals, and they actually, in international meetings, they often, try to show that they're doing well in developing their nations, and that the nations get ranked, and they want to try to improve their ranking. Oh, sorry, I just stopped sharing. I should have. Okay, so the purpose of this model was to develop a model to assess future projections for informed decision making, prioritizing, and planning, and also evaluate emergent behavior and novel insights, and build a framework for future expansion. But I think the primary thing I want to show today is how the model can make projections, and how decision makers could use these projections for prioritizing and planning their investments in the Sustainable Development Goals. So there's the goals. The goals are connected, and then there's polarities involved with these connections in sort of a causal loop diagram, which we're using from Ferry and Seti in 2018, and we translated the causal loop diagram into a stock and flow model for quantitative analysis, because the causal loop diagram is purely qualitative. And then we calibrated the model with values that were obtained, historical values obtained from something called the Sustainable Development Report, which is developed by an organization run by Jeffrey Sachs, who's quite famous in the world of development, economic development. And then we calibrated the model based on this historical data, and then we optimized the model we projected into the future, and then we tried to optimize the results to get a better future. So as I say in my presentations many times, that the system dynamics can tell you where you are today and how you got there. So that's the current values of the Sustainable Development Goals and the near-term historical values. And then hopefully, if you have a nicely calibrated model, you can project into the future to see where you're headed if nothing changes. And then you can possibly improve the situation by changing the structure of the model to get to a better place if you're not heading in the right direction. And this model was built with using the database from the Sustainable Development Goal reports, and it can be used for any country in the world. And in the paper that we're writing, we're going to apply it to 3 countries. We're going to apply it to Japan as a developed country, India as a BRICS country, and Nigeria as a developing country. And we're going to show that this model is applicable to different countries at different levels of development. But today I'm going to talk about its application to Canada. So this is, you can't read this very well, but this is the causal loop diagram that was developed by Fari and Sadia. And I turned this into a matrix, and you can see it here, where you see the SDGs in the columns and the SDGs in the rows, and basically a plus sign is in a green square implies that the SDG in the row has a causal relationship with the SDG in the column. So, for example, SDG 2 has a causal impact on SDG 3. And the light red and negative signs means that there's a negative polarity, and this is a causation matrix, not a correlation matrix. But many statisticians are familiar with correlation matrix, but this is actually causation, and the idea is that the causation is in one direction, and it's actually based on physics and not statistics. So that's the causation matrix we're using. And we built a system dynamics model where each of the SDGs is a stock in system system dynamics language, and that's an accumulation of some value that you're interested in measuring. The SDG scores are actually non-dimensional. They're just a value between 0 and 100, or 0 and 1, and 1 being good and 0 being poor. So they're just an amalgamation of many factors, which are called targets. And in our model, as you can see here, we have the SDG score as a stock, which changes over time based on these flows, which are shown here as the progression towards the target. And the targets are identified, and there's a time to change that that score that's shown as the time to change the SDG target. And then the targets are set by the government of the day, but they're modified by the connections between the other SDGs. So for example, this SDG to progression is the ratio of the SDG score at present divided by the initial SDG score in 2017. And that shows the progression in SDG2, and that progression could be up or down. So you could have a situation where the SDG is actually getting worse rather than getting better. And then we use that progression in the calculation of a modified target that's based on the government target, and it's modified by the connections between the other SDGs. So this is a modified target, and then we use that in the flow to get to a new SDG score. We also have this idea of a multiplier, and this multiplier is a way that governments can influence the movement towards new goals. So for example, as I'll describe later, the multiplier is set to 1 for the status quo, and then you can add more effort to various SDGs to improve the scores. And so the multiplier is actually greater than 1, which means there's more effort being applied to that SDG. And I'll get into that in a few minutes. So this is the projections for Canada with no change. So that's basically, as I was saying, the system dynamics can tell you where you are and how you got there. So this is from 2017 to 2022. You can see this is the path we got to in Canada for the first 9 SDGs, and then it tells you where you're headed if nothing changes. And you can see that there's quite a number of SDGs that appear to be dropping quite drastically over the next few years. Is our projection that they'll be dropping quite significantly over the next 5 years if nothing changes. So this is for SDGs 1 to 9, and then this is for SDGs 10 to 17. And notice this SDG 13 is the worst performing SDG, and that is climate action. So that's actually a significant issue in Canada is our poor performance in climate action. So here's the scores in 2017 and the scores in 2022, which is the latest data, and our projected scores in 2026. And you can see that that many of these projections are showing a decline in the future scores. And so there's some that are showing increases, but many are showing declines. And I think actually 12 of them are showing decline. So that's the first 9, and then here's the second 8. So this is, you can see particularly bad is climate action. That climate action started in 2017 at 66, and by 2022 it dropped to 30, and by 2026 we expect it to be down as low as 18 out of 100. So that's we consider that a very low score. but also to notice that inequalities are a problem, that we may suffer from problems of inequality in the future as well, and that we wouldn't want that to happen either. So so then the question was, how do we improve the situation? So our methodology was to look at improving the worst performing SDG. So in this case, we're trying to improve the minimum SDG score, which at this point is climate action. But when climate action improves to a certain level, then other SDGs may be a minimum score, as we'll see. So this was, if we took 100% of the effort we wanted to input into changing the minimum score, this is the way we would divide the effort. And so you can see that 26% of our effort would go into improving climate action. But notice that 49% of our effort would go into affordable and clean energy, which is much higher than the effort. Even though we're trying to change the climate action, we by investing in affordable and green energy, we'll be able to influence climate action in a positive way. So now here's the results of the investment of this effort into the SDG scores. And you can see that many of the SDG scores are now improving where they were previously declining. And that's even though we didn't invest in them directly, we invested in climate action and affordable and green energy. We can see that they have a synergistic effect on the other SDGs, and so so that's interesting. And then we also see here that many of the SDGs from 10 to 17 are also increasing. And you can see the huge increase in climate action that can be obtained through this investment. So so that's what we're thinking, is that maybe policymakers might find this model interesting for improving their scores by investing effort in influencing the SDGs, and so here's the results of the changes. So with no change, we see that the scores were fairly low, and with the effort expended, we show that most of the variables change quite considerably positively upward. So that means that this effort is really helping to improve the SDG scores. So that's the first 1 to 9, and then here is the effort results with 10 to 17. Notice here one thing, that responsible and production and consumption has actually dropped from the no change situation. So it still is increasing if you go back to look at the slide, but it increases to a much lower level. So actually, I think what it's telling us is that climate action, investments in climate action and green and sustainable energy, affordable and green energy, will lead to inhibiting the ability to be responsible in production and consumption. So so that's an interesting idea, is that there's trade-offs involved with this effort, that you may have to sacrifice one SDG to improve the other SDGs. So here's the results of the minimum scores, and you see that that the minimum score with the status quo with no effort was this red line, and then with effort, the minimum value is here, and you can see this small kink in the results, that this is probably the values for climate action, but at this point here, another SDG will take over as the minimum score. So that's the results of the minimum. And then, so just finally, as a discussion, what we found was that according to our projections, 12 of Canada's SDGs were showing a decreasing trend. So that's what we felt was the problems in the future. And SDG 13, climate action, was the poorest performing. So what we tried to do was we tried to optimally improve the minimum score, that is SDG 13 at first, climate action. And when we did that, we allocated effort, more extra effort to make those improvements. So we would allocate in our calculations, we would allocate 26% of our effort to SDG 13, which is climate action, but 49% of our effort to SDG 7, which is affordable and clean energy. And then we found that only 2 of the SDGs with this new effort applied will still have a decreasing trend. So we've gone from 12 SDGs with a decreasing trend to just 2 with a decreasing trend. But we did notice that responsible and SDG 12, which is responsible consumption and production, will increase much less than before. So there are some limitations to this model. We have very limited historical data, only from 2017. And we felt that since we only had data from 2017 to 2022, that would limit our ability to project into the future. So we only projected into the future till 2026. We may want to project to 2030 because that's the goals of the longer term goals of the UN was to model the situation until 2030. Also, we calibrated it for each year from 2017 to 2022, and each year a new SDG report is published, and so the model would have to be recalibrated every year and might produce different results. That may not be such a difficult problem or a problem because generally governments make policies on an annual basis. So with each SDG report, we could recalibrate the model and we could support government policymakers in their decisions about how to allocate resources for the next year. One of the issues is that we don't get into the actual policy changes that would be required to improve the situation, and so we would have to leave it up to the government of the day to determine what those policy changes and programs would need to be to implement and improve the SDGs improvements. But there is some guidance in the sub goals of the SDGs that we don't discuss in this paper, but there are quite a number of sub goals for each SDG, and maybe the sub goals would help the government of the day to determine, how to implement specific policies. Also, too, we assumed that each of the SDGs were given equal weight in our application of effort, and right now we realize that the different SDGs will respond differently to different amounts of effort. So it may be more difficult to change one SDG than another. And so right now we're working on a methodology to include the idea of the difficulty of changing the SDGs, and we're getting some pretty promising results there, and we hope to be able to include that in our future work. So as I said, we want to continue doing work on this subject. We want to assess different optimization goals. Like, for example, we considered maximizing the minimum, which is I think a good policy, but we might also want to maximize the average or the median or something like this. And we want to project further into the future, possibly to 2030. We want to apply to more countries. and we want to demonstrate it to policymakers. You know, I've been presenting this around to a number of nations through presentations, and I'm getting some interest from a number of different countries to see how this could apply to their country. And then basically, you know, our goal is to improve the quality of life for a country's citizens. So we think that by helping them prioritize their effort, we can do that. Here's some selected references that we used in our work. And we should have a report out shortly. And when we do, you can contact me, and possibly I could send you a copy. So thank you for listening. Here's my email address and my co-author's email address. And if you want to ask any questions, you can ask them, or we can go into a general discussion as well. And I think, yeah, and so, yeah, let's just open the floor to discussion. Does anybody have any observations or ideas they want to discuss? Go ahead, Martha.
Just a general question with the SDGs in general. Are these goals sensitive to the size of the population in each country, or the population density and distribution, like presence in large cities or in rural areas? Are these sustainable? Are these SDGs integrated or sensitive in any way to changes in overall size of humanity on the globe, or
well, you know, it is
immigration policies?
It is a country specific approach to improving the world. And in fact, it doesn't directly introduce a population, but indirectly it does, through the idea of hunger, poverty, sustainable cities, health and well-being. All those issues have a population nature to them. But I guess I'm thinking that possibly, you know, again, you know, this was a UN idea that they wanted to get agreement from all countries on this approach. So they may have avoided including the population as an issue because it would be controversial, and maybe some countries wouldn't accept that idea that they may need to control their population. Similarly, I think that, you know, you could also look at, say, democracy, and I think that would be an important issue. They do have something called justice, peace, justice, and strong institutions, which sort of gets at the idea, but it doesn't directly relate to accountability per se. And in fact, I have another piece of work that I was working on, which was on actually control of corruption. And in that work, we were talking about accountability, rule of law, and a number of institutions or things that I think are maybe more controversial for a country, and I think that there would be some scope to combine the SDG work with the institutional work, because I think there's an important interaction between institutions and quality of life, especially in the area of government accountability.
Thank you.
What do you think, Eric? You're on mute. Eric, you're on mute.
Sorry, you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Just to follow up a little bit more on that too. What about differences in government structures between different countries, and the interactions between institutions and governments, and quality of life? Like, the definition of quality of life for one country might be significantly different than to another country. So how do those play impacts on different variables?
Well, you know, like I said, the Sustainable Development Goals cover a wide range of aspects of quality of life, but not necessarily all of quality of life. Like for example, there is a measure of health and well-being, and I think maybe a sub-measure of that is life expectancy, but it gets rolled up into an overall goal of health and well-being. So one thing that I haven't shown you, and maybe I should have, is that there's 17 goals and there's like 170 different targets, and those targets are sub goals, and then those are actually more quantitative than the Sustainable Development Goals, which was a roll up of the quantitative values into a more qualitative value of a goal in general. So I'm not all that familiar with the targets, the sub goals. One of my co-authors is, and I could ask him, if he knows of some individual sub goals that might relate to your question. But in terms of institutions, it does have a goal called peace, justice, and strong institutions, and that I think may also address your question.
I had one more too, if I could throw that out there. There was an interesting correlation between a massive increase in, I think it was 12, which was the responsible production and consumption.
Yeah.
And a massive decrease in environmental, the environmental one you were showing. How does a huge increase in responsible production and consumption lead to a massive decrease in environmental issues that you showed in the slides?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. I think that possibly the emphasis on responsible might have been downplayed in the goal measurements, and that instead of being responsible, it was just primarily consumption and production. So if it was responsible production and consumption, I think then yes, it should be positively related to environmental aspects. However, I think that again, quantity has a quality, and just the quantity of production and consumption could lead to quality reductions in environmental aspects. So yeah, again, I do think that that possibly the idea of responsible is somewhat relative, and it's not absolutely clear to my mind what that means in terms of its impact on the environment.
Yeah, that was something I was wondering too, is how are they choosing to define and measure what is responsible production and consumption? What does that mean? Like an efficiency, maybe an energy use efficiency, or I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm going to look into that.
That's a very good point. And like I say, I think again, it would be beneficial for us to look into the sub goals of responsible production and consumption to see, how that is rolled up, how those sub goals are rolled up into the overall goal. And however,
and what they're choosing as.
Sorry. However, it is there. The relationship between the sub goals and the goals is not simple. They they have a very complex dynamic that they use to roll up the sub goals to the goals. It's not just say the average or some kind of simple weighted average. It's a real complex formula for doing that roll up.
But they do have a formula.
Yeah, for arriving at a goal, they have broken into sub-goals. Each sub-goal is then given some points on point system, and each of them is aggregated up to 100 points. So it is like that.
So a measure out of 100.
It's a measure, yeah.
Okay.
So we cannot also say that it is we cannot even say that it is efficiency, because it aggregates for a different country into different points because they are not able to meet certain of the sub goals under a goal. But finally, when they want to take it as a goal, they would like to see at 100 point.
Okay, I see.
Yeah,
So the
like I
new
said,
annual report 2022 is giving it very clearly. It is, and earlier ones also from 2017. If we go into the annual reports, we get this message clearly.
Is that the annual reports of the IPCC?
This is
The UN based,
on the UN, yeah, on the UN website.
the UN based
Yeah,
yeah, the
climate.
UN Sustainable Development Report.
sustainable.
Okay,
Yeah.
which I would think would be a subcategory of within the IPCC reports.
Probably they're not
Or
related.
me.
Probably they're not related.
Okay.
I wouldn't think they would be directly related, but they
Climate.
they may refer
Yeah,
to each
climate.
other.
Yeah,
But
that will be related to climate section only.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
and
on the
climate.
the website is SDG. That's all. UN
Oh, okay.
SDG. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
So Ivan,
Yes, Ray.
how do you project to the future how they will do?
Yeah, that what we do is, as I said, we have a stock of the SDG score, and we have a target that we're trying to achieve, and the idea is that with no change, eventually, in the long term, we would reach the target. And so, but each of the targets, what we're assuming is that that the data in the reports reflects the past targets of the government of the day, and that each government of the day is respecifying the targets every year that it's trying to achieve. And it's sort of an assumption that 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 what they're getting is what they're intending, which may be incorrect. You know, that they're getting a certain result, and so that's how we calculate the target that we believe they're striving for. And then what we use is the last target of 2022, and we say if nothing changes from between 2022 and 2026, if they use that target for the rest of the period until 2026, then this is where we would expect them to be in 2026. So it's this idea of closing the gap between the current value of the goal and the target.
So the future projection is really based on past performance how they've done in the past few years, and if they continue on that, they'll achieve a certain.
Yeah, that's true. However, it's not statistical in nature. It's a physics and calculus approach to it, which is based on causation and calculus or system dynamics, stocks and flows, as opposed to statistics, which would be some kind of linear regression.
Okay, but if you take SD13, which is climate action,
Right.
you have it in 2023 taking a very rapid improvement.
If there's an investment in improving the climate action.
Okay, but I don't understand the if. Is this based on plans that have been announced, or is this based on?
No, this is what we suggest. This is our
This is your suggestion.
This is our recommendation. Yeah, our recommendation is if they want to improve the results of their SDG scores, and they want to maximize the minimum score, then we recommend that they try to invest in improving the scores by applying extra effort to the situation. So basically, the effort is sort of a combination of people, money, and time, and it's a sort of an abstract notion. It's an abstract notion of the priorities of the government, but that's where we say that, you know, we don't define in the model the specific programs a nation would do. All we say is that they should apply some effort to these to improving these areas of their development.
Okay, so again, so if I take your chart on SD 13, and I'm a policymaker, what do I know that I have to do to achieve what you're putting on this chart?
Well, I think that, you know, what a policymaker would maybe take from this is a priority, is trying to develop some kind of a priority of where to invest where to invest their budget or their program towards development. So it's primarily a priority idea, is that, you know, their first priority might be in affordable and green energy, as opposed to climate action to improve the minimum score. But they might want to invest in a balanced way in both of those things to get the most improvement.
But I also don't fully understand SD 13, because I would think that if you're doing something on SD that sort of got you do energy, for example, as a separate.
Yeah.
I don't know which one it is. Forgotten.
Seven.
And 7. Okay, so I thought if you do something, I thought 7 would be a direct result of climate action. You know.
Well, it definitely is. You know, like through the matrix of causal connections, there's a strong link, or actually a causal link relating affordable and clean energy to climate action. So I think that that it's synergistic. That is, if they can improve affordable and clean energy, they can also make a dent on climate action. So there's sort of, you know, in this causal relationship, there's sort of two possible situations. There's an enhancing or a synergistic relationship, and then there's an inhibiting or a negative impact between the two things. So in a synergistic relationship, improving one thing will cause an improvement in another, but a decrease in the first thing will cause a decrease in the other. So they're moving in the same direction. Whereas in an inhibiting system, a decrease in one will cause an improvement in the other, and an improvement in one will cause a decrease in the other. It's a causal relationship, which goes from the cause to the effect, not necessarily an idea of correlation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. But how does the prosperity of the country, or the projection in terms of the prosperity of the country, impact this? You know, if economies are good, well, it has both a positive and negative
Yeah,
consequences.
I think that
And
was going
on the other
back
hand,
to,
if the country is in economic decline,
yeah.
that can greatly impact well, their priorities. And
Yeah, I think that's what, going back to Eric's question on how does climate action relate to responsible production and consumption. So I think that the prosperity of the country could be measured, you know, in terms of GDP, and GDP, I think, is primarily production and consumption measures, and so. However, I think that there's maybe a limit on how much production and consumption you can do without negatively impacting on the environment. So I think, yeah, the prosperity of the government is a prosperity of the country, I think, is in the SDGs, but but there's also many other things, you know, like, for example, reducing poverty, reducing hunger, and improving health and well-being are also part of the prosperity of the country, which may not be measured directly in production and consumption.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's complexity.
Yeah, but that hopefully the cause and effect relationships can tease out, how these things are interconnected in a causal relationship. So so that's where system dynamics shines, I think, is that it's related to causation, and it says that there's a cause and there's an effect. But there can also be unintended consequences, which show that say improving climate action could have a secondary effect or an unintended consequence of reducing the ability to produce and consume. So it's all there's direct effects and there's indirect effects, and some of the effects are intended and some of them are unintended. Oh, actually, everybody, system dynamics say that everything is an effect, that it's not unintended or intended. But basically, I think that what system dynamics can do is tell you, the trade-offs that are involved in terms of possible reductions that could be created by improving one area of a system.
Okay, so yeah, so this is at a national level. So how can this be used? So let's say, many cities today are saying they want to be smart cities, or they've got some initiative along that line. How does that align to?
Well, there is a measure in here of sustainable cities. And I'm not sure if that would be useful to an individual city, but possibly maybe instead of maximizing the climate action, we could maximize the sustainable cities. I think I can't remember what number that is, but there is a SDG that relates to sustainable cities and communities. So for example, like I said, you could focus on that in that SDG, maximize that SDG, and see where you would invest in the other SDGs to improve that SDG.
Yeah, so one of the initiatives that, of course, any city can make in terms of, it goes back to 7, your energy efficiency. Buildings is one of our greatest use of fuel.
Yeah, for sure.
So if the smart cities were able to give incentive programs or achieve significant reductions in the energy building uses, or in terms of that would then, again, it goes back to your causal relationships.
Yeah,
it may happen under 7, but I guess it would impact 11 and maybe some others as well.
Yeah, well, maybe Ray, maybe offline we could talk about this, and we could look into the Smart Cities initiative and say, maybe there's some value of looking at the SDG goals with relation to smart cities. I'd be very happy to talk to you some more about that offline.
Yeah, SDG 11 is about cities, and they look at sustainable urbanization. They also look at what is called as per capita environmental impact of cities. They also look at safe public spaces, accessible green and public spaces. So that may have certain relationships. And in turn, if you look at SDG 11 dealing with cities, it has an effect or a position with SDG 01, that is your poverty, SDG 10, that is inequality, SDG 3, that is health, SDG 12, which is sustainable consumption. It also relates to SDG 16, which is peace and inclusion. So there is a lot of overlapping. There is a lot of what is called an effect, a cause and effect from SDG 11 cities with at least 8 of the other.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you there. So poverty should be, or I won't say no poverty, but certainly reducing poverty certainly has to be a primary objective of any city.
Yeah.
That
yeah.
is true. So if Ivan agrees, I would like to say that this is a broad perspective. It is on a broader level, but we can go deep down into each of the SDGs. We can build it up. We have that efficiency can be built up in the model, and it can be related to all the other sub criteria per each of the SDGs. That is possible, but that can happen only in future.
hard stage, hard science.
Yeah, I'd be very happy to work with you, Ray, on that. I know Nkozi's got a particular interest in smart cities. They have a smart cities initiative, and maybe what I could do is we could reframe this presentation and give it to the smart cities organization, or possibly invite the smart cities organization to a Canadian chapter event.
Well, one of the problems with smart cities is, at a 100,000-foot level or airplane level or whatever level you want to call it, it's a great objective, or I don't even know if it's a vision. But what does it really mean in a given situation?
Yeah.
And
Well, I think my view of
there's very
smart
carry on.
cities is that it's primarily a technological solution rather than, say, a human solution. So it's primarily looking at a technology that can increase the efficiency of a city, and possibly, like I said, it's not got a very strong view of how things like poverty and health and well-being are related to the city development. But it should have some kind of benefits to the citizens in terms of their health and well-being.
Well, you can get into this discussion on that as well, because a smart city should serve all its residents, not just a select few.
Yeah, but my view of it is that it's a technological
Okay,
solution.
I appreciate that view. Okay, good.
Martha's got a question, and maybe we'll wrap up with this last question.
Well, it might be a short question, but I'm also prepared to go offline. In the model, is there any showing of the possible phenomenon? Now, this is a system dynamics type of question and a big picture one. Did you see any patterns of shifting loop dominance, where there could actually be a change in the causality map over different periods of time segments in the model? And you mentioned that each year the model is going to be recalibrated, and I see that as a great thing, because I think we can't assume over a long period of time that there's always going to be multiple. For example, in SDG 7, it had about 4 or 5 plus signs along it, and I just think from a system from a dynamic lens, time dependent lens, those relationships may change because of their interdependent relationship, and that's one highlight that maybe a simulation might bring out, is that there could be there's a dynamic interdependence between all these things, and something can go from positive to negative at different time segments in the simulation, depending on how forward, how far, what your time horizon is, and that kind of big picture stuff.
Well, the simple answer to that question is that when we try to maximize the minimum SDG, the minimum changes. That basically, once you improve one SDG, you can improve it to a point where it's no longer the minimum, and some other SDG becomes the minimum, and then you have to look at improving that SDG. So so it's that's a simple answer. A more complex answer to that question would be possibly using some software that I know is available called Loops That Matter, and Loops That Matter could possibly bring that out as to, you know, which are the dominant loops and which and when does the domination change over time?
Precisely. Yeah. Billy Schoenberg's work. Yeah. Loops That Matter.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna have to sign off, and so we'll close the meeting now. And like I said, my email is available on the presentation. I'll post the recording, and maybe Martha can post the recording as well on the Canadian website, and I'll post recording on my LinkedIn page. So if you have any questions about further work or follow up, I'd be very happy to talk to you again. So thank you very much.
Thank you yeah, and on behalf of everyone, thank you very much for this presentation. I'm sorry you missed out time-wise. Baja